Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the CCW Secretariat for your work to allow remote participation in this meeting. I am pleased to have this opportunity to share updates on developments from the Mine Ban Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions, which might aid your work here. Before I start into the topic at hand, I'd like to acknowledge that this presentation was prepared on the traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. I'm temporarily on Okanagan land because the COVID-19 pandemic has worsened a childcare shortage. With the wine harvest starting, extra hands were needed to care for my young nephew. Now, I understand that was not the most conventional opening to a diplomatic presentation, but Mines Action Canada's policy of recognizing and acknowledging the Indigenous nations upon whose land we work is not the only reason I started with a personal context. In that short paragraph, I provided information which would be crucially important if you're planning activities to address contamination by landmines. From that introduction, you know that this community has an Indigenous population, a shortage of childcare, and an agriculture-based economy. We have learned from implementing the Mine Ban Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions that information like that, generally referred to as gender and diversity analysis, is key to effective implementation of survey, clearance, and risk education, and therefore is relevant to work under APII, especially under Article 10. Now, you may have heard a few terms circulating in these sorts of discussions, such as gender, diversity, and intersectionality. Let's look at those terms first. Gender does not just mean women, nor is it about biological sex. Gender refers to the norms, attributes, roles, and rights associated with being identified as male or female. It's a dynamic social construct that changes according to time, place, and cultural context. Diversity refers to all the different aspects that make up a person's social identity. That can include age, disability, faith, ethnicity, and so on. Intersectionality is a concept that captures the various layers of advantage and disadvantage everyone experiences based on societal and structural systems. Women, girls, older persons, minorities, persons with disabilities, and other marginalized groups tend to experience reduced access to opportunities. But when several of those factors overlap, they can cause increased discrimination, leading to exclusion. In a policy context, taking an intersectional approach is a strategy for considering the concerns and experiences of people from all groups as an integral dimension of the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies and programs in all political, economic, and societal spheres, so that all benefit equally from programming and inequality is not perpetuated. Far from being irrelevant, gender and diversity are key considerations in the implementation activities, whether you're implementing the Mine Ban Treaty, the Convention on Cluster Munitions, or CCW's APII. For effective operations, operators need to be aware of ethnic and linguistic diversity to ensure that risk education materials and survey work are carried out in appropriate languages and in a culturally sensitive manner. For the example of my personal context, knowing that there is an Indigenous population alongside a diverse settler population is important. Without that knowledge and relevant adaptation into local languages and contexts, parts of the community could be missed and important information not collected, leading to accidents, hazardous areas being over or underestimated, and the activities themselves being rejected by the community. Similarly, knowing about different cultural relations to land, including local agriculture, is important for prioritizing clearance operations and for designing risk education activities to meet the needs of those working the land. Effective humanitarian mine action operations need to be tailored to the target community in all of its diversity. Moving on to gender specifically, I assume that women are people and therefore members of the community, so I'm not going to address why it's important to include women in effective mine action operations, because having to justify why 50% of the population should be consulted and included is not an effective use of our time here. What I would like to talk about are lessons learned about ensuring women's participation is meaningful and effective. Being conscious of gender divisions of labor is one way to ensure that women contribute meaningfully to mine action. For example, I mentioned a lack of childcare in my personal context. If childcare is generally considered women's work, a shortage of outside-the-home childcare could be a barrier to women's participation in the workforce or even outside events. Offering childcare at risk education sessions or workplaces and setting event hours to ensure reasonable times to go home will help address that barrier while also making it easier for men to have a family life. When gender is taken into consideration, it helps everyone, not just women. As part of the Civil Society Gender Working Group, I've worked closely on this issue with civil society partners who are implementing humanitarian mine action operations around the world. Lessons from the field have been very important in guiding our work. For example, it is known that mixed gender teams for risk education and non-technical survey help boost inclusivity. And if you hire siblings or married couples, that can help alleviate cultural concerns about mixed gender teams traveling together. When it comes to decision making, there is significant work to be done to ensure meaningful participation from women. UNIDIR's 2019 study, Still Behind the Curve, looked at the gender balance of participation in 23 arms control and disarmament forums spanning from 2008 to 2018. The findings were not flattering, with no forum coming close to gender balance among participants. The Conference on Disarmament in 2018 scored best with 37% women. The 2018 MSP of the Convention on Cluster Munitions had 33% women, but the Mine Ban Treaty in 2017 was a shockingly low 25%. The 2018 CCW GGE on lethal autonomous weapons, the most recent CCW meeting included in the study, had 31% women. Mines Action Canada did a survey last year on employment in mine action. The research found that countries with smaller gender gaps regarding participation in the workforce seem to have higher percentages of women working in mine action. But overall, the percentages of mine action employees who are women, which is 19.79%, is much lower than the percentage of the global workforce who are women, 38.96%. Since I'm not in the room, I'm going to preemptively respond to questions or comments about how women are not interested in mine action or in disarmament or don't have the training to do this work, with a reminder that everything we do in these rooms and in the field is taught. No one is born with a deep understanding of disarmament policy or knowing how to clear an improvised mine in an urban area. Give women and girls the opportunity to learn about this sector. You'll be amazed how many of them are interested in and very talented in this work. Meaningful inclusion of women and girls remains a challenge across the sector, but at the international level, diplomatic developments have begun to address the challenge. The Mine Ban Treaty's Oslo Action Plan, adopted last year, recognizes integrating and mainstreaming gender considerations and taking the diverse needs and experiences of people in affected communities into account in mine action programming is a best practice for implementing the treaty. Gender and diversity are mainstreamed into the actions and indicators under each section, making the Oslo Action Plan an excellent roadmap for effective treaty implementation. The Oslo Action Plan also created gender focal points on each of the treaty's committees. One committee member is designated that committee's gender focal point, and their role is to ensure that gender is taken into account in the work of the committee in line with the obligations under the Oslo Action Plan. I've been very impressed thus far with the work of the gender focal points, and their collaboration across committees is to be commended. Also, a Finnish-led working paper on the implementation and monitoring of gender mainstreaming in the Mine Ban Treaty was co-sponsored by 25 states in the review conference last year. That paper is available on the Mine Ban Treaty's website, and I highly recommend it to all mine action authorities. In the Convention on Cluster Munitions, the Convention itself provides a good foundation to build upon when it comes to gender and diversity through its victim assistance language in particular. The Dubrovnik Action Plan built upon that foundation, and this year, the Lausanne Action Plan has the opportunity to further develop the provisions. The Lausanne Action Plan is currently in the draft stage, but what we have seen thus far is promising. A cross-cutting issue on gender and diversity has been included, while the related actions and indicators are getting stronger with each draft. Part of the reason these two treaties have been so successful in adopting gender and diversity actions to promote effective mine action is close partnership with civil society. Earlier, I mentioned the Gender Working Group. This is a collection of civil society representatives who have expertise in gender and diversity. We've been working for almost 2 years now to support strong policy and practice on gender and diversity within the Mine Ban Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions. The Gender Working Group members include many of the leading mine action NGOs, but I'd like to flag in particular the Gender and Mine Action Program at the GICHD, which is a recognized world leader on this topic and can provide training when needed. States parties have also worked closely with the UN Mine Action Service, and the UN Gender Guidelines offer an excellent resource for all mine action operators and mine action authorities. I understand there's not been much discussion on gender and diversity in the CCW, but I hope that will change now. CCW should be aiming to meet the standards set by the Mind Ban Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions. If these are new topics for you, civil society remains available to support your efforts. Above all, I encourage CCW to adopt a mandate for 2021 that includes a proper study on how gender and diversity factor into the work of AP2. Thank you.